Hi, it's Greg Levine. It's the party line for October 28th, 2011, and I know that you all want to join me in wishing Nuclear Regulatory Commission Chairman Gregory Jaczko a happy 41st birthday. It's his birthday this weekend. Happy birthday. And in honor of his birthday, the entire Nuclear Regulatory Commission got together and decided to vote on some of the recommendations from the near-term task force. That's the task force convened to evaluate Fukushima lessons learned from the Fukushima disaster. Okay, they didn't actually do it in honor of his birthday, but perhaps they did do it in honor of him, since he theoretically was pushing for a faster move than the majority of the committee was. And on 7 of the 12 or 13 recommendations that were contained in the report, they have moved to go ahead without delay. That's a quote, without delay. What does without delay mean? It means that by 2016 you might see implementation. That's right, 5 years, although, hey, Greg Jaczko thinks that by 2014 you might be able to get one of those regulations in place, and that would be the one dealing with station blackouts. Specifically, the recommendations have to do with about 4 or 5 areas, which is that plants need to reevaluate their seismic readiness and their flood preparedness. They need to come up with a sort of emergency response plan and a post-disaster evaluation plan. They need something to deal with the sort of cataclysmic power failure issue that happened in Japan, where you lose both your AC power from the grid and your backup generation fails. So you need some system to prepare for that, and you need better instrumentation inside the spent fuel pool so that you can actually tell what's going on should there, say, be one of these catastrophic power failures. You know, things like meters that work in high temperatures, things like meters that work on DC battery power, and also the hardening of vents in Mark 1 and Mark 2 containment. In other words, some vent that will actually work come in emergency when you have to relieve the amount of hydrogen that's developing inside of these, thus trying to prevent the hydrogen explosions that blew the lids off a couple of the containment buildings at Fukushima Daiichi. All reasonable, all things that we should do, all things that we should do without delay. Not everything we should do by any stretch of the imagination, nothing like we've been talking about here for months now, as far as a comprehensive reorientation of the safety regime in light of the lessons learned from the Fukushima disaster. But things that they should do. But this whole idea that 5 years is sort of the functional window by which we can actually do any of this is, well, it's interesting on a couple of levels. First, it's interesting that when they actually want to do something, they can actually do it. I mean, the time period, 7 months since the earthquake, is too long by my standards, but by NRC standards is freaking whirlwind. So that they got a task force together, they made recommendations, they hemmed and hawed and bickered about the recommendations, they had some congressional hearings, and then they actually voted on the recommendations. Now, recommendations aren't rules, rules have to be drafted, they go through a federal process, but still, something was done. When people focus on an issue, things can get done. But, that said, the world isn't standing by and waiting. While the Nuclear Regulatory Commission gets it together and moves slowly to come to a meeting of the minds with the industry and draft rules and implement, and you know, as we've noted, Mother Nature has basically a weekly or at least monthly message to the nuclear industry, be it a tornado or a flood or a hurricane or an earthquake, even here in the United States. And so the idea that we have 5 years to sort of, you know, gradually get it together to implement some, not all, of these safety regulations says to me that there's something inherently wrong with nuclear power, because if that's what it takes time-wise to regulate it, to bring things up to a safety code because a problem, I don't want to say a problem has been identified, a problem has been brought to the fore because we knew these problems existed. It's just that it took a disaster, a major disaster, not, you know, to get it forward. But let's dig even deeper, which is that you've got this Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They've given things this, you know, 5-year window to get things done, and this assumes that, you know, the Regulatory Commission stays basically comprised of the people who are there now, which isn't a sure thing because, for instance, Chairman Jasko's term ends in 2013. That's before any of these recommendations are supposed to become hard and fast rules that will be implemented and will force compliance. No guarantee he gets reappointed. No guarantee he could get reconfirmed by what will probably be a more Republican Senate. And no guarantee that his moves have pleased the industry enough so that the industry won't whisper in Barack Obama's ear and say, no more with Mr. Jasko. So that's one thing. But also, it doesn't take into account what's happened with previous generations of rulemaking at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. For instance, in the interviews that Gregory Jasko did at the beginning of October, which I wrote about at some length a couple of weeks ago, he talks about his desire, his frustration, his goals to see full implementation of a new fire safety protocol. And that's something he came to the Commission in 2005 wanting to see better implementation of fire safety upgrades. Those were recommended in response to the Browns Ferry fire. And Jasko admits that today in 2011 he still feels like they haven't fully realized those recommendations, that they're having problems getting compliance, that they don't really have an effective system for assuring compliance. He finds it frustrating. The Browns Ferry fire that these recommendations were drafted in response to was in 1975. 36 years. And we still don't have full compliance on recommendations from that disaster. After 9/11, another series of recommendations, this time for security and safety upgrades in light of terrorist attacks. Those recommendations were initially voluntary because the Bush administration didn't believe in regulations, but in 2009 they were made mandatory, except for 60 of the 104 nuclear facilities, because it was going to apparently cost too much. So if a major fire, and the Browns Ferry thing, for those who don't recall, was a very scary accident. If a terrorist attack can't focus attention and change the way the United States responds to a disaster, I don't have a great amount of faith that this earthquake on another continent will eventually spur us to move, especially given moves now to actually expand the number of nuclear generators in the country, the apparent friendliness of the current administration to the nuclear industry, thanks to the generous ties between them, shall we say, and you know, politically, the situation just doesn't say, oh, this is a sure thing. We're going to learn our lessons. We're going to implement this. And so, you know, without delay or here to stay, I mean, Gibraltar may tumble, right? The Rockies may crumble, but nuclear waste is here to stay. And it seems like the problems of regulating the nuclear industry are also very much entrenched. And if that's the situation, then maybe it's time to do something else without delay, which is to turn the page, to secure what we've got and let it run its course. These plants are all approaching their natural lifespans. Start decommissioning them and start spending the money that we have to spend to regulate and subsidize nuclear power on things that can replace it. Safer, more economical, renewable energy sources. And that, at least, should be the party line. Happy birthday, Mr. Jasko. I'll see you all next week.